All right, earlier today, the Senate Minority Leader, Charles Schumer, and the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, held a joint press conference to call for the passage of the HEROES Act. Now, that is the bill that, $2 trillion that the House passed. It's been sitting in the Senate for a couple of months. There's been negotiations back and forth between the Senate, the White House, and the House, I guess Pelosi should say, to get a reasonable bill through. Now, there's a reason the HEROES Act doesn't work is because it bails out mismanaged states and cities, all Democratic-led. And it does a host of other things we're going to talk about in just a moment. But I want to play this clip of Chuck Schumer saying that this is a referendum, this is a mandate from the people this past election.
This election was maybe more a referendum on who can handle COVID well than anything else. The Donald Trump approach was repudiated. The Joe Biden approach was embraced. And that's why we think there's a better chance to get a bill in the lame duck if only the Republicans would stop embracing the ridiculous shenanigans that Trump is forcing them to do in the election and focus on what people need.
And joining me to talk about those shenanigans they're being forced to uphold, like decency, common sense, and fiscal responsibility, is the House Minority Whip, Steve Scalise of Louisiana's 1st Congressional District. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, always great to be back with you.
So let me just ask you point blank, was there a mandate in this last election to pass the HEROES Act?
I'm not sure what election results they're looking at. If Speaker Pelosi's talking about the results that ended up having her get a net loss of at least 10 seats as opposed to a net gain of 10 seats, which she's predicting, that's a 20-point swing. That's a pretty big mandate against socialism. Not for a bill that, as you point out, deals more with marijuana than jobs. It sends $100 checks to people here illegally. Those are the kind of things that are in the HEROES Act.
Yeah, and it goes even further. I mean, there's a lot of policy that is woven deep into the HEROES Act. Not only does it have a huge price tag, I think it's roughly $2 trillion, but it redefines terms like non-discrimination to advance their whole sexual orientation, gender identity issue. It actually will preclude by, in effect, faith-based organizations from being able to be a part of the coronavirus relief. It also, Stephen, I know it's something you've worked very hard on when it comes to the educational relief provision. It excludes private religious schools and homeschooling.
Absolutely. And Tony, of course, days like now where you've got some school systems that are still refusing to educate children in the classroom, there is no better and more important time to have the debate about school choice. If somebody's going to take your money but not educate your child safely in person when other school systems are willing to, then parents ought to be able to go to those places that will safely educate their child while taking the money. So, but so much in that bill, from bailing out failed states, they have a section that releases an untold thousands of criminals from prison. They still can't even tell you how many people that would apply to. What does that have to do with COVID? Look, there are bills that would get huge bipartisan votes that would just renew Paycheck Protection Program loans for small businesses. The fact that they look down on small businesses as if it's some kind of corporate bailout, there are millions of families that don't want to be unemployed and their businesses are about to go under. You could save those jobs. That's where our focus ought to be.
Right. And it also, we made reference to the marijuana, what that is, in part, there's several elements, but one is the Safe Banking Act rolls that into this, the full text of that bill, which grants marijuana industry direct access to the banking, which currently is prohibited under the Controlled Substances Act because it's unlawful. So, I mean, what does that have to do with the coronavirus?
Right. It's a totally separate debate that is contentious and, again, has absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19, with the businesses who are dying on a vine right now because some of these governors are still shutting everything down, even though the protocols are out there for how to safely reopen, whether it's your restaurants, your schools, your businesses. They're killing jobs. And, by the way, deaths from non-COVID related things like substance abuse, overdose, depression, suicide are all off the charts right now. because of the shut-in, and they won't look at those deaths as part of the cost of these shut-ins.
Right. Let me just, from the New York Times, we're going to talk about Charles Schumer's mandate. The New York Times, in their exit polling on the top 5 issues that matter in deciding how you voted for president, number 1 was the issue of the economy. 35% said it was the economy, followed by 20% of voters saying it was racial inequality, followed then by the coronavirus pandemic at 17%, followed then by crime and safety, tied with health care and healthcare policy at 11%. 17% to me does not sound like a mandate.
No, and it was not a mandate for them. But look, they don't care about what the will of the voters is. You saw Chuck Schumer just Sunday in New York saying, if we change Georgia, we change America. I mean, do the people of Georgia recognize that Chuck Schumer wants to bring his New York values to America using 2 Senate seats in Georgia? So he literally would view the 2 Georgia seats as proxy votes for the state of New York and their values. I don't think that's where Georgia is, but that's what they're trying to do. And you even saw Joe Manchin standing up saying he's not going to vote to pack the court or to defund police. And, of course, he and AOC are now in a big back and forth. So liberals are fighting socialists right now over what happened, what went wrong in the election. Only could Schumer and Pelosi be so delusional as to think that that is some kind of mandate. Why are they fighting within their party right now in a vicious war if they had a mandate?
Well, I think if you want to talk about taking New York values to the South, you might want to ask outgoing Senator Jones from Alabama how that worked out.
Right. He voted with Chuck Schumer for those New York values and got repudiated. And he outspent Tommy Tuberville probably 5-1 and got destroyed. And think about Michael Bloomberg, Tony. Michael Bloomberg went to Texas, spent $100 million to flip the Texas legislature from Republican to Democrat. And what ended up happening is they got more Republicans. And he did the same thing in Florida. He spent over $30 million in Florida to flip their legislature, and they rejected his New York liberal values in Florida, and they increased their Republican margin in Florida. So maybe Bloomberg will spend tens of millions of dollars in Georgia to help us win those 2 seats and hold those 2 Republican Senate seats.
Let me ask you a question, Steve. I know you're headed to a meeting with the new incoming members of Congress, but I want to ask you this. You've pointed out what's been happening around the country this election. The Republicans gained, I don't know, they're still being tallied, but you're going to be within striking distance of the majority in the House, and I think in the midterm election that happens. You've got the Senate was not handed over to the Democrats. As we've been discussing, there's 2 runoff races in Georgia that will decide the outcome there, but it's right now 50 seats in Republican hands. You've got state legislatures that have made gains across the country. What the blue wave that was projected did not happen. The pollsters were wrong. I'm going to talk later about that with Scott Rasmussen. But the reality is there's some inconsistencies here. Why the president, who many people rode his coattails, these state legislatures, the Congress, it just doesn't add up. And I think that's why a lot of people are asking questions about the outcome of the presidential election.
Yeah, Tony, there are a lot of states that had serious irregularities and didn't even follow their own laws. I mean, look in Pennsylvania. The law is clear that any ballots that come in mysteriously after 8 p.m. on Tuesday night when the voting ends aren't supposed to be counted, and yet they were counting those in. No one's been able to give us an exact number. If it was more than the margin, then that changes Pennsylvania because that violates their own law. And the Supreme Court even told them the other day to keep all of those ballots separately because there are serious questions raised there. Georgia's state law has a mandatory recount because it was such a close race. You look at some of these other states, Michigan, Wisconsin, where they weren't even allowing Trump poll watchers, which their laws allow for you to watch what they're doing. They wouldn't let you watch what they were doing.
Yeah.
What are you doing behind closed doors when the law says you have to let people watch you and be transparent? You kick them out the room.
Yeah.
Clearly, you had to be doing something nefarious if that's what happened in violation of your own state's law. This has to be cleaned up, and I applaud President Trump for standing up for the rule of law and standing up for his rights, which are clear under the law. You go back to 2000. Al Gore would be president for that next 4 to 8 years if they would have just said, okay, AP called it for Al Gore, I guess he's president. Well, guess what happened? He didn't get the votes. No state has certified Joe Biden as the winner. Not one state has certified Joe Biden as their winner. That's a swing state. And yet the AP wants to declare him the winner. That's fine for them, but they're not the ones who send electors to Washington to select the next president.
Yeah, this is far from being decided. Steve Scalise, thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Always great to be with you, Tony. Appreciate the work you do. God bless.